ask John to keep that, your different eye colors, black and white, move there.
Yeah.
It's such a pretty picture.
I know. It's my blue steel, man. The sultry eyes. I don't know. That was after like 2 hours of doing a bunch of on-camera stuff. And I was honestly tired. And I was like, I need headshots too. And so the guy was just like, all right, give me one with some sultry eyes. I was like, shut up. And I did one as a joke. He's like, actually, this is your best picture.
Well, it's perfect. You still had your makeup on.
Yeah, I know. That was a joke picture.
Nice.
But we went with it. The whole thing's a joke. I mean, come on. Having to do headshots? Seriously?
I think it's sexy, dude. Doesn't get much better than that.
Your picture's like from 40 years ago, dude. You were like...
It is old. Yeah.
You were 18 in that picture.
No. Dude. It's not that old.
It's pretty...
I do need to update it.
I think mine's 10 years old.
Yeah, you guys look like your children. I mean, this is from 12 years ago. This is from 2008 or 9.
We don't have time to work on our sultry looks like you do.
Yeah, you just want to not, as far as the viewers are concerned, you haven't aged a day. The DR community is...
That's the point.
Come on, man. You got to update those pics.
I got an updated one in my forms.
Yeah.
Don't have the vid team from dealer.com to do this stuff anymore.
Yeah. Just saying. Put some rouge on you guys and get you some new headshots.
I'm just going to start using yours.
I mean, we do have a similar kind of, if you flip my picture, you got a little bit better jawline, I would say, than I did in that pic. Of course, that was 12 years ago for you,
Yeah.
But
yeah,
your hair seems curlier now.
It's just
you been curling your hair?
Yeah, I got a perm. Nah, just long, just gets curly.
Yeah, your hair gets curly when it gets longer. Yeah.
Yeah, you see my son.
Curly Sue.
Yeah. He always gets asked if he got a perm.
Yeah.
All right, 5 seconds, guys.
So we talk about hair. Very funny.
Yeah, that was a bit too much bromance.
For sure.
How
can you not? When you got John's photo like that, it's just hard not to talk about.
Yep.
Well, and John probably, without a doubt, is the #1 Refresh Friday guest. Most appearances.
For sure. Most appearances.
Hopefully more than one way. #1. What? What else? Just appearance count? Talk time?
Your sultry looks.
Yeah.
I was commenting before that the pictures in the preview are from about 12 years ago for YouTube. My picture's from like 2 months ago. Just want to point that out. You catfish people.
Some point we'll get around to updating that, putting our old faces on.
Mm-hmm.
It's all right. We'll give you guys a pass. It's a ragtag group, right?
That's for damn sure.
That works.
Guerrilla effort at the DR headquarters at HQ.
I think the Dealer Refresh community falls in that DGAS profile.
Mm-hmm.
Don't give a. Yep.
Yeah.
But
no worries.
I'm more interested in the things that come out of our mouths.
Not the way that our face looks.
I hope not.
No.
Yeah, and speaking of that, typically when you're on, John, you're dropping some pretty good bombs. So expectations are high today, man.
I was called in on short notice, but I do think we've got some interesting stuff to talk about.
You're just always on call. It's not short notice.
You You just let me know time and place.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll figure out. Yeah.
Well, when you have the DR Truth title,
yeah, exactly.
So that's what we're here for today, right? Some truths.
What you got for us, John?
Well, actually, let's before you show it.
Yeah.
How long you guys been looking at this? And take a few steps back for people who might not know really how Driven Data got into payment advertising. And
two boys with an idea 2 years ago, you and I
think it was your idea. I just said
Right.
I'd save you some money.
Maybe I convinced you, and you were, well, I think we just naturally started to like ricochet the idea, but it was kind of an obvious deal here. And so I think the time was probably July of 2019 when you and I started seriously talking about, maybe May, July, somewhere in that summer, I think we started to talk about it. And the basic idea was that digital retailing and payment accuracy had matured to a point, and you had shown that the accuracy of the payment and the consistency of the accuracy, the ability to handle all scenarios of payments. And when you think about all scenarios, there's some that you can't do, like cars say under 10 grand that have 180,000 miles. Like those are obvious exceptions.
Yeah, if the bank won't give you a loan for it, it's hard to make a payment.
There's no payment unless you're like, we're not doing like, anything too weird. But for the vast majority, we're talking 80, 90% of car situations, payments were extremely accurate, very consistent. And because the programs were changing dynamically and the payments were changing because people were changing the price of the car, people were, the incentives were changing. They were constantly kind of switching between lenders, in terms of what would produce the best payment, that there was a huge disconnect between the, digital retailing that was even on dealerships' websites and then what was in the marketing. And the problem really for me was about, okay, well, let's think about the numbers, right? So if 125 people buy a car from a dealership, there's roughly going to be about 280, maybe 300 people that are in the dealership, right? In 1 month. That dealership's probably going to have somewhere between 15,000, maybe 18,000 sessions on their website. And so from in-store to website, that's like 15 times more people on your website than come in your store. In terms of people that are exposed to your advertising, it's like 1,000 times more than are in your store. So figure 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 impressions, right? So if payments got into ads, we would increase the scale by 2 orders of magnitude, 1,000 times more than are in the store. And what would happen? The first kind of idea was like, we've kind of learned with anything in sales that the more times you write people up, the more people you get into that kind of payment conversation, the better you typically do. And so if you increase that by 1,000, like what would happen? And then the other kind of idea was the promise, right? So there's payments and ads and has been for a long time. The problem is they're totally inaccurate. And
they're not believable.
Right. When every car is $199, like, what does that even mean? It's just customers have become almost apathetic to the payment, I would imagine. Fully expecting they would click on this special that some person manually wrote in one ad once, saved, and then published, which is completely disconnected from the dealership, from the bank, from the car, from any of these things, that they would go through that experience, go either onto the website or in the store. At some point, the truth would be revealed that this is not accurate, and then the whole thing kind of falls apart. And so that's kind of been advertising 101 for as long as I've been in the business. Is you lie to them in advertising, and then we'll tell them the truth later in the dealership. And it's just like how effective you are at persuading people that, that's just normal. I guess is kind of the deal. And what if you could if you put payments in front of more people earlier, then everybody that kind of did work with you and did get into the store is already much further along and much more qualified. So your gross profit potentially could go up from back-end gross profit, and the sale would be much easier because the customer's more qualified. And so it seemed like whatever you could make up some gains by showing a lower payment and convincing somebody to take a higher payment later. And maybe that works 10% of the time, right? But the other 90% of the time, it really doesn't work, and you end up going down to that payment anyways. So what if you just focused on making your net super tuned to people that were already in the right kind of payment band? And I think a good analogy of this is think of like a job posting. If a job posting doesn't have the salary and somebody then applies and then they expect that it's going to be that they're going to make 100, 150,000 when the job's actually 50, all of these candidates just kind of, obviously they're disappointed, then you don't find the right people. But when you put the job posting with the right salary, say 50, 60,000 in this example, everybody that applies is in that expectation range. And so you're dealing with a qualified candidate and you're having a much better conversation. And I think that's common sense in just so many other areas. And I think it seemed to be common sense here. The challenge is not agreeing that it's common sense. I think that anyone could kind of make that argument and believe that argument. I think the challenge is how do you do it? And how do you make that effortless to render that payment in every ad from a single source of payment truth to make sure that in all of these touch points, the payment is the same, and how do you pull that off technically? And
I was going to say the technology behind that's always been the difficult part.
Yeah. And, obviously, Anthony and I think Terry brought up another point about credit, which is absolutely valid, right?
And I think Anthony is rebutting Terry.
Yeah.
Terry's a bit of a broken record on that one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, and we obviously talked a hell of a lot about this. I mean, this was probably, maybe 20% of our conversation, if I can go back, right? And we figured out a number of ways to handle that. And I would definitely say that it's part of the process, and it's definitely important to guide somebody through it. I don't think everybody wants to go through the full kind of credit analysis before they're into a vehicle selection. I think that's an overreach. I think
I'm not giving my credit on Facebook. Sorry.
Right. I think what we're trying to do. Remember, what advertising doesn't sell the car. It creates the intent. And what a better payment and a more accurate, brand promise that this payment is going to be the same in this ad as then when you come to the dealership. That I think was the biggest bar to lift. The credit thing is a much different bar, and I think a different part of the process. But I think coming with this understanding of how do you get the most accurate payment to the real payment that the customer is going to end up buying the car, that I think was kind of the big mission.
Well, I think so. Maybe a more technical way to state it, John, and it just occurred to me as you were saying this. So, is to show payments that the banks actually have programs for.
Yeah.
And you could argue that the OEM provided payment in their ads is one of those, but they're, the down payment or the fees aren't known to that dealership, and things like that. And those are all taken count for in a disclaimer that's long as hell and turns people off.
Compatibility matrix of the incentives. You have the taxes, fees. You have, in many states, you have multiple tax rates in different counties. So you have to factor that into it. And it's complicated, right? So if you can do all that and make the payment accurate, then you're just narrowing the gap between expectation and reality. And if you can make a 50% improvement, that's huge. And I think this is more than, I would argue, a 50% improvement. I mean, this is like significant. And because the status quo was none of that information, it was a fake payment. So from that to something that, of course there's going to be some minor nuance, but you're talking about like a near 100% improvement in accuracy.
It's probably 20 years ago. I remember on the showroom floor at the Volkswagen dealership I was at the time. And, you'd always take the loss leader vehicle, the absolute base model. Now, in the state of Maryland, you at least legally had to have that particular vehicle on your showroom floor, on the lot in order to advertise it, and needed to be associated with a stock number. I guess that was proof. But we would take, and we would do this all the time. They would order just a base model of every vehicle just so we could work a payment and throw it out in, in all of the advertising. And I remember, speaking to Gary, my manager at the time, like, why do we do this? Like, no one ever wants this particular.
And it attracts the worst,
it gets the worst customers in. They're not qualified. I was like, we're just spinning our wheels, wasting our time with these people. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to move them to something else. Maybe something pre-owned. That was about the only option. And of course you had to have something like that in stock.
And it's brain damage.
But I remember
everybody involved.
We would go back and forth, and I'm like, why don't we just put a real payment? Like, just take, a nicer vehicle. Well, if we do that, all the competing dealerships are doing the exact same, so we got to be competitive. And I'm like,
yeah. So I mean, my argument is
the word competitive.
This is the way to be competitive, because.
I was like, we can be competitive with our expectations and customer service.
Right.
No, the word competitive actually translates to equal incompetence. We're gonna be the same as them. And a lot of time that was his reason.
I think
there was no way around it.
2008, 2009, you could order a Chevy Aveo with no AC and and manual crank windows.
Manual shift.
Less than just out of 10,000 MSRP, like very close to maybe 10 or 11,000. We could price it under 10 grand for sure. Of course, nobody wants that car. And of course, no salesman wants to talk to somebody who wants that car. That is the last thing you wanted. Oh my God, the Aveo.
Well, as soon as someone would come through the showroom door asking, "Hey, this vehicle I saw in the newspaper, where's that one at?" Salespeople would scatter.
Right. So what I'm talking about is the opposite of a manual crank, no AC Aveo mentality. Whatever that is, the opposite of that. And what would that happen? What would do? Well, what would the results be if you did that? And so that's what we started talking about back in, this idea has had its birthday twice. We've been doing this for 26 months. And,
well, I mean, I guess you've had other companies out there that have, tried to pull this off, but it's typically like a range. They'll throw in some type of payment range, or, they'll throw a payment in there and maybe it's, manually processed.
Well, Jeff, to be fair, I think a lot of the time it's scary. So for a number of dealers who've been doing the lowest payment on the Aveo, which is the demo car, you can't find it today when you show up. But it's scary to say, okay, we'll show a real payment. We've just never done it this way. And because of COVID and because dealers were shown that customers will do things from afar and will work with you when you're being real with them, that they've now started to accept this a bit more. But it's pretty fresh. Yeah. It's pretty new.
And our timing couldn't have been more, on point. I mean, we finished this, had it, I mean, there was initially, of course, first 3-4 months, there was problems with it. I think by September, October, we were really in a good place. By the end of the year, it was pretty smooth. And then, February, March was COVID, right? So we had this pretty dialed in before COVID started. And so when we kind of offered this approach, it took off. Like everybody wanted this. And, we noticed right away, obviously, that in DR was just kind of really hot across the board right away. And that has not been true this year, right? So this year, there's been a complete inversion of that mentality as supply is constrained. We've seen, the opposite to be true in a lot of cases. And so it's like,
well, there's another issue on that front. You're right, but our support team was bringing this to my attention this morning. We've got a dealer who's marking up all their cars over $20,000, and banks won't return a program on that.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
So if you are $20,000 over MSRP, your LTV is blown out.
Oh, yeah.
Way over 120.
Yeah, we've been surprised because I just had this conversation 2 weeks ago. Working at a Benz store, we had a AMG G class come in, and I think it's like 50,000 over MSRP, and that's only because they were local. Otherwise, it would have been 80.
Right.
And I was like,
I've heard.
How are they getting approved for this?
But you're talking about a Mercedes. We were talking about a Kias.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
And I've heard, I've heard some stories that in California, Hondas are like 20 to 25 over.
Right.
And I was like, what bank would approve you for that? But I don't know. I guess there's some banks out there doing it.
Yeah. They're desperate for business too. Their volume's been crushed.
Also,
this has got long-reaching arms and repercussions, man.
Yeah. I don't know who in their right mind would do that, but whatever.
Well, there's been some interesting things that some of the lenders are doing as well. They're getting way off topic here, but there's one in particular that's residualizing some things that they wouldn't normally do, and that's helping to drive some stuff up. So there is creative financing happening at the lenders, but they're just as desperate as everyone else to make deals.
Absolutely. And I'll be clear, like this isn't just working on new cars. This is on used cars as well. So, and we split the analysis. So we did an analysis by new and used. So we're going to show all the stats today, obviously, but we've done a side-by-side analysis between new and used so that we can kind of understand the difference, because there is a difference. There's also a difference into the stage where the customer's at in the buying process, whether they're early or late, how this works. But again, we've been doing this for 2 years, learned a ton, managing the culture fit with the dealership and the expectations for marketing and tuning that. There's 20, 30, 40 different things you can change to make sure that the culture matches the dealership. And so you brought up payment ranges, Jeff. That's one thing that we've done, that Alex has done. There's been the case of whether you include tax and fees or not. At what point do you do that? How do you kind of squeeze the customer in the process for information? That's a part of it. Where you're routing them into different experiences, that's a part of the process. So there's so many different kind of ways that you can tune this that we've learned as we've had feedback from dealerships, and we have to make sure that if it doesn't work for their culture, they're not going to support the idea. And so it's a matter of like finding that and then making sure that the marketing delivers that expectation that we've already established on that cultural promise. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we've tried to persuade towards things that are more effective. When we see that there's door A and door B, and we know what's going to happen when we go down door B, we would prefer to encourage our customers to go down door A because it's going to be better for them. And so making sure that that's clear and having the data to show that story is, you know, is equally as important as being able to have the culture conversation, because
Ooh, is
the
that the
culture
segue?
changes. The culture changes. Yeah. So we can go, let's start with kind of like what the ads look like, and then I think we can go into some of the actual stats. Cool. All right. So first things first, we do this dynamically in paid search and in paid social. And there's many phases of these campaigns. So we have campaigns that stretch across different phases of the purchase, whether they're early, middle, late, whether they're looking for new or used, lease, loan. There's so many different kind of categories to this. And that overall infrastructure of those campaigns is very consistent. And that is kind of the blueprint or architecture of all the automation that renders these payments and renders the variables into the ads. And so when we're putting in payments, whether it's on the pre-owned, new, or pre-owned new, these payments match actually where they're going to go when they click on the link. So when they click on the link, they're going into a payment experience where they're going to see that exact payment. And so there is no gap between those. Whatever they see on that screen, they're going to see here. And again, these change every day. So these payments are going to change for a multitude of reasons. We don't know. We don't think about it. It just happens. There are scenarios, again, where we have to manage that and make sure that we're using this in the right way. But this extends well beyond the awareness phase of advertising into consideration all the way right down to the very tail end of a purchase. And so there's a lot of remarketing and a lot of ways to look at what people have engaged on the site and connecting that into really specific remarketing audiences. So for example, if we're looking at a shopper that's been deeply engaged on SUVs and a payment band between 400 and 500, we can remarket them with SUVs in that payment band. And so not only are we remarketing similar vehicles, but we're marketing similarly priced vehicles from an affordability standpoint. And it's important to understand the price and the payment are two totally different things. And Alex, you really showed this to me early on. You could have cars that were 15,000 difference in price, 20,000 difference in price in the same payment. And when you're thinking about remarketing, most remarketing doesn't really even consider price, let alone payment. So when you think about remarketing and staying in that affordability and segment level kind of approach, the remarketing gets super, super tight to what the customer's like. Their shopping experience is coalescing on a certain type of vehicle. And as that as they're coalescing, so is the payment and so is the remarketing, and it's matching them as they're kind of flowing down. And so this is obviously applications within search and in social. And again, the whole process of managing this, we don't have to think about, which is kind of nice.
And so you're saying if a customer would click on, let's say, for example, that CRV for $249, and you want to remarket to that customer, you would find other like vehicles that sort of fit in that price range, but maybe the payment's $255.
Yeah, and in this case too, if it's we're going to show they're going to click on probably a search result. The landing page here is probably going to be search result page, and the first car is going to be $249. And so do you think
the word "from" throws customers off? Because when I see "from," I'm like, oh, from.
Yeah, I mean that's
$249 to
literally
$1,200.
Going to be the first price of the first car on the list. So after they click on that in ascending order down, they're going to see $249, $255, $275, $289, right? So they're going to see all those payments. So what we're trying to think about is the first image impression. So when they click on this, what's the impression that they get if we were honest or not in the ad? If they clicked on the link and the first thing that they see is a lie, they're gone, right? So we're thinking about how do we capture the signal that we told them the truth. And so there's a number of ways that we can do that in looking at the site engagement and understanding what happens post click, right? But when we think about here, just in the impression and click through rate kind of level, it's all about perfecting these ads from a copy and from a image and from a price. How are you getting your maximum CTR in these ads? How can you possibly improve this? And so the first kind of signal that we look at in the process is click-through rate. We want to try to boost that. And so when we started to look at how do we analyze that, we just do a split. There are dealerships that use this, and there's dealerships that don't. There's roughly an equal number of them, and they're all of all the brands, right? This is all across the country, really kind of everything from big to small, right? And the equalizer is click-through rate, right? This is the number of impressions we delivered, how many people clicked on them. And so every month in this analysis, not only was it better, it was consistently better by a lot.
Yeah, it's pretty significant.
Yeah, so 60% higher. And that's just in the first step. Every metric downstream, as I'm going to show you, is going to see some difference, right? But if you think about, like, this opens up the floodgates of your advertising. You're very,
let me ask you,
if there's 280,000 impressions and your click-through rate goes up 60%, like, that's insane. That's not just a little difference. That's like,
so have you found that, are these your best performing? Because I know you guys do a shit ton of ads over there and different designs and everything. Has it come down where including that payment in the ads, are they your best performing ads across all different types of campaigns?
Well, I think when I think about best performance, it's about, when it comes to this click-through rate, the closer you get to the purchase, click-through rate goes up. The further away from the purchase, the click-through rate is lower. And so as your audience gets smaller, and like I talked about that people are coalescing on a vehicle, as that occurs, click-through rate goes up. So the earlier you are, the lower it is, and then as you kind of get towards the end, and the pool gets smaller. So as the users get smaller and the cars get more relevant at the end, right? And
yeah, you should have a higher click-through rate.
Yes, it absolutely is the highest performing, but it's the highest performing for that reason plus this reason. So some of that is just the nature of shopping, right? You're going to be more engaged with something after you've like committed towards it and you've looked at this thing 4, 5, 6 times. The next time you see it, you're more likely to be engaging with it versus something you see the first time. So like massive difference. And used car campaigns do better. That's just been the case for advertising for a long time. Used car ads have always, as long as I can remember, from a CTR standpoint, outperformed new. The car is more unique, right?
Okay.
So you have broader searches and you have broader interest on new, less unique, less that think of that. There's less, people are less focused on one new model than they are one specific type of used car. There's just more interest in that relatively. But the improvement is 85, is significantly better. So relative to, the prior. So new, the increase is higher, but you're starting at a lower baseline with new. Just think of it that way. So you have this huge net gain, bigger net gain on new, but you're starting at a lower kind of level because new just is inherently harder than used for those kind of reasons, right? People are more specific on a used car purchase than new, therefore the CTR is just inherently higher. And anyone that's done ads, anyone that's ever looked at that and knows, more than 1 month of experience is like, oh, that's how that is. And this remains the same with payments.
All right.
So
the floodgates open.
What's that?
I said the floodgates have opened.
Floodgates are open. But now we need to think about the process, where they're at in the process, right? So we segment all of our advertising in 3 very clear toll booths. And we define the logic and have had consistent logic for this for nearly 2 years, probably more than 2 years. And so we can understand what phase somebody's at in the shopping process based on the logic that we set through these 3 tiers. And we call it something different, but for the purposes of this, we'll just call it high, medium, and low, or high, mid, and low. So in the high level, payments don't make that much of a difference. In fact, I would argue it's not even really worth it in kind of early top funnel awareness level advertising and awareness.
So it's more of a branding campaign.
Makes almost no difference. And that's because you're giving a payment to somebody who isn't even like fallen in love yet, right? So the closer they are in love, the more the terms matter. So if they're not even thinking about you and your brand yet, it's too soon. And and this is actually slightly better for new. So I realized that with this slide, we didn't break it out between new and used. But when we did that this morning. New was slightly better. Used, it was a little bit worse. For new, it was slightly better. So, and that kind of makes sense. I think it's more common to have new car payments in awareness ads. It's very common. Like think back to print and think back to TV. You're just bombarded with payments and awareness advertising. And that's how it becomes, co-op eligible, is because it has a payment in it. So that's very common for there to be payments in new car ads. And so I think for used on that early kind of stuff, it's really not common. So I think that's probably driving some of the behaviors, just the consistency of there being new car payments. But mid funnel and low funnel, it's massive, right? Especially in the mid funnel. And the mid funnel is, obviously only to high is the second largest group of users. So this is a funnel because it gets smaller, right? So in the middle, you have this like really thick middle that you get by having payments and ads. And this is where we're seeing traditionally the worst fall off is in the mid funnel. And so you're getting people that go into the dealership experience, they click on ads, go into the website, do something, right? Maybe they never look at a car. Maybe they're just kind of like glancing below, right? But when they get into the mid funnel, payments make a huge difference. And I think it goes down to that like separation of, wow, this dealership has actual payments and I can actually play with my payment. I can understand that. And that is in that phase, that's the question that they're asking, right? Hey, I like this type of car. What is it going to mean from an affordability standpoint? So why does this ad work? Well, you're answering their number one question. Their number one question is, what is it going to cost me?
Yeah, the operative word is me. Something that I had to become a civilian to really realize this. Meaning, I had to leave the dealership and became a customer, and I didn't think this way in all of my years at Checkered Flag. I was more thinking about how quickly can I ram a customer into our process. I wasn't thinking about what are the points that work for the customer. It was easier for us to generate a price. I can get a price from a sales manager for an ad like that, but trying to get a payment out of them, that was a pain in the ass. Like that's not,
especially a lease payment.
Yeah, try and get a decent payment.
Roll their eyes faster than like anyone in history. Ask in 2005 to 2015. Ask a new car manager for a lease payment.
But look, when I never really thought about the consumer mindset on how much more beneficial a payment is over a price, because I know what $400 a month means to me,
right?
But I don't know what $40,000 means,
right?
I as a customer, I probably don't have $40,000 sitting in the bank and know what that really means. So it's harder for me to visualize and get that thing that I want, which is the two things I always want. The only two things I'm really after from the dealership before I go in and visit is how much is it for me,
yep,
and how soon can I get it?
Yeah, I mean, if the price is $40,000, the price might as well be blue. It means
Right.
nothing. I think we also have learned, as anyone that's worked in really high performing dealerships, that like understanding landing on payment in the sales process and getting the customer to land on payment, not price, always equals a more seamless sales process and usually higher gross profit as well. And so if we're moving customers into a payment based conversation sooner, that's just easier for negotiation, easier for delivering the car. So we want to do that anyways. So why are we like concerned about doing it sooner? Is my view, right? And clearly, in this kind of mid funnel where they're starting to say, what does this mean for me? Right? That's when it has this massive spike in difference. And then obviously that continues, not to the same magnitude, obviously, in the low funnel, but obviously continues to be a strong kind of differentiator in the end. And this is kind of, again, when I looked at this, I'm like, all this makes complete sense. I don't even have to like question, because it just fits the narrative so clearly of what you learn inside of a dealership, that like, if you're not on the right car and you're talking about what the price and payment is, it sometimes is an awkward conversation. But once you land on car and that payment conversation, you're back into that. You may soften them up, ask them like, what's your current car payment? What have you considered, right? And then you're getting into vehicle selection, trying to fit that. But when you're in that car and they've landed on it, and the payment conversation just happens so much more effectively, I would argue. And so same is true in marketing. It's just, more measurable here than just anecdotal, which is kind of what we all kind of learned. Here it's pretty clear. So
question for you, John.
Sorry?
Question for you. So
yeah,
especially with using your ads with the payments, and then let's say you're using the LumaQuote because that's the piece that actually displays the payments for that particular person on that VDP. Have you been able to track from click from payment to engagement with that particular call to action?
Yeah, so we track.
So like click from the ad to now they're on the VDP, and like the first thing they're engaging with, or at least they are engaging with, that payment piece.
Yeah, so number one, they're all going into the payment piece, right? So number two, we track lead sales, in attribution, because we have.
Okay, that's right.
Because we're integrated into the first party data, we tie this all to the transaction. So we have the campaigns that we know have payments. We have the whole flow of the process, all the way from the campaigns, the landing experience, the engagement there, the leads inside of the CRM, and the sales, and that's all tied front to back, all the way back to the campaign. Yeah. So we can then go back to the campaign and say, what did this get?
I was forgetting where you were landing the customer, because I know, because we use you guys. And in the beginning, we would go back and forth. Do we land them on the VDP, which of course then we've got the LumaQuote plugin that displays it there on the VDP, or do we land them right into the LumaQuote landing page? And I think most of the time it becomes especially with the LumaQuote landing page, it's got basically everything you need. So by step that VDP on the dealership website and take them to the LumaQuote dealership VDP.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the way that they've integrated it into the website experience, I mean, it feels natural. I mean, it's not, it doesn't feel like you're leaving at all. You're right on that site, right, engaging into it. So, and obviously, like picking up where we left off is important, and that's some of the things that they do to make sure when that customer reveals themselves and they go back in, all that data is persistent and all their settings are persistent. That's a really cool thing that not a lot of people have pulled off. And, to do that and do that all the time, when you leave and you come back, and that CRV payment that you configured is the same, that's like, wow, I don't have to start over at step one, which is kind of like, we all say duh, but to make that duh reality is not easy. Like that's a whole thing all by itself. which I think is going to continue to drive the customer towards this overall feeling of this dealership does this differently than I've ever bought a car. This is something that I want to do business with them because they're giving me this information. And then when they do go into the dealership and the payment's the same, and they're like, what? You know what I mean? That's pretty cool to do it from marketing all the way down into a purchase. And obviously,
well, that's where most dealerships fall off, though. Wouldn't you agree? It's, once they come into the dealership,
oh yeah,
they're getting, a lot of most of the time they're being presented something totally different.
Yeah.
The salespeople aren't aware.
We can't make any claim that we have completely won over all the hearts and minds of every single human being involved in this process, right? That's not what we're saying. What we're saying, though, is that this works regardless of that. And I think if they improve that as well, then you kind of have that secondary benefit of continuing to carry the water that we started, at the beginning of the race. But yeah, of course the ball gets dropped, and that's performance and culture and all that stuff is tied into this, which is where we had to start there. You can't do this and jam it in and say you have to do it this way. It's what are you comfortable with? We'll meet you there, and then let's learn from the data and grow together. And by a year and a half, 2 years later, it's pretty dramatic what happens. There will be significant cultural shifts, and again, I think that's reflected in the data in the sales performance, which we'll show later. You'll see that as well.
Before we jump ahead, there's a very important question from Chris Harshman. And that is coming right up here. So he wants to know if the metrics change based on price points.
They do. Yes. So the higher the price, the less the payment matters. And so that we've definitely learned. And the rules for how you manage the payments change. And so if you're high volume import type vehicle versus, Jeff, right, selling G-Wagons 50 grand over sticker, right? That's a different customer and it's a different expectation. Payments are less important. If you
gotta ask what the payment is, you can't afford it.
Yeah, there's some truth to that, but obviously
same with C-Class.
The bias towards leasing is also so high, right? And obviously, Jeff, you would know the numbers better than all of us, but we want to show the best possible scenario, which is what obviously Alex and Frickin' Tech does to keep that payment the best possible one based on these pre-configured rules. There's also going to be more money down in a luxury transaction. You're going to see significant increase. And we've the average customer is putting down with trade equity right now of $5,000 plus probably $2,000 to $4,000 in money down. We're seeing $7,000 down all day. That's an average. So at your store, Jeff, it's higher than that, right? It's 10, 15,000. And so in those kind of configuring settings for your payment, I would encourage a bias towards defaulting more money down. In the more luxury you are, the more you should expect more money down. People have more money down. The trade is an important part of this equation, which obviously, again, in the case of
everybody's got equity right now.
Yeah.
Unless you bought your car this year, you're really screwed. But everyone else has got equity.
A car and you bought a car, yeah. But in January of 2020, the equity position was 0, and now it is $5,000, and has been, these last probably 4 or 5 months. It's averaged about 4,700, 5,100 for us across all stores is what the difference between payoffs and ACVs. And so, obviously that's going to change the payment considerably. And so factoring in money down in the trade in the experience is part of the process.
And we got a YouTube comment coming over. So, YouTube and LinkedIn streaming is kind of new for Dealer Refresh, but Tony's got a great question. So have you tried this with other sources than Frickin' Tech? And how much deeper can you go?
So rolling that out kind of right now. Working, and we can do this with everybody. We're doing this on behalf of internal teams in dealerships and their agencies as well. So you don't have to use our marketing necessarily. We can partner with your agency, and they can actually do this. And so we just it's kind of a complicated thing to pull off, and we can't do marketing for everybody, right? So it's our deal to try to enable this and put this in other people's hands. And so we have a product called Augment, which essentially does that. It allows dealerships, their agencies, even their providers to be able to leverage some of these things, including our first party data, so that they can, do that without us doing the marketing even. So, yep, that's definitely something that we do.
That's great.
But I recommend you use something like Frickin' Tech over Roadster.
Yeah.
I might be biased.
So,
would you?
One of the things to do is it's important to separate landing page views from CTR, because sometimes you get a loss there. And so not every click ends up landing. So the site doesn't render, they close it before the site renders. And so landing page, this is just kind of a fact check between the first slide and this slide. This just kind of makes sure that we're checking our math, so to speak. And again, you can see the same general vibe, no real change. So this is just kind of anybody that's asking, yeah, we're double checking in this perspective as well. And when we think about like leads, again, this is all from attribution, right? So we connect dynamically the first party data into the campaigns and tie these together to understand, right, what do we get in leads as well. And so when you think about, one, you're getting more leads per impression. Two, it costs less money. So if you're spending $1,000 on advertising, you're going to get a lower number you're going to get more leads for your money by having payments and ads versus not having payments and ads. And that's across new and used. It's more significant in new than it is in used. And new advertising without payments is kind of, again, I think clearly some of these people are smart about why payments have been in new car advertising. It works. I mean, and it does when you do it this way, especially as you carry that message all the way down.
Well, by the way, I just heard that the average price of a new car from sales of last month is now tipped $45,000.
Yeah.
Really?
Who can afford that? Think about how many buyers you've knocked out of new car shopping realm. So you gotta put leases on those things, that's a $900 a month payment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jon, have you been able to track a difference with the payment ads? Is there a difference in performance between Facebook and paid search?
So it works better in both. And we've done the analysis differently because Facebook, you have kind of this continuation of the process into remarketing from kind of the awareness advertising all the way down. In Google, you don't. Yeah. The campaigns, however, in Google have different strategies, and there's different parts of the process. So the keywords and the audience participation. So I think it's important to kind of call out that we use our audiences in Google just as much as we use our audiences in Facebook. And when somebody is in a certain area of the sales process, we change the rules. So if somebody, for example, is in your CRM, we're going to bid more because they already have awareness to you as a dealership. We don't want them to defect to somebody else. And we are willing to pay more because the likelihood of a conversion is significantly higher later on. So you pay up front a little bit more to bid on somebody who's a prior customer, but the likelihood that they convert is dramatically better. Like in some cases, like 80, 90% better. And so if I have to bid 20% more to get 80% higher in conversion, that's a significant improvement in the overall throughput. And so in Google, we're able to use the audience participation to determine where they're at, just like they are in Facebook. However, one of the key kind of things is like in Google, they have to do the search. In Facebook, you're kind of guaranteeing they're going to see that ad, right? When somebody's in an audience in that month, the likelihood they're going to be impressed is like 90 some percent. So, I mean, they're going to see it. In Google, it requires, we can't like call them and say, hey, search for that Corolla, right? They have to do that on their own. And then once they do that and then they're in the audience, then we kind of know. So yes, the difference is consistent across both. However, the method is different given they have to search. So, and this kind of, again, kind of carried through. Closing rates are better with payments than without. And this kind of, again, makes sense. You're more likely to buy a car after you submit a lead if the payment, that was sold in marketing is honored in sales, right? So if the marketing payment and the sales payment are essentially the same, given obviously there's going to be nuance from the trade, there's going to be nuance for some of these things, the likelihood that they close is significantly higher. And so again, that kind of is what you'd expect. You know what I mean? We're essentially keeping that truth.
Yeah, you've put a deeper hook in that fish.
Yeah, and so the gross profit is kind of another thing to consider. And so gross profit is better when you do this. And I think a lot of people were skeptical about this. I was probably, to a certain extent, not like, I didn't think it was going to be this stark, the difference. But it's true. So, and I think one of the first kind of data points that I saw that kind of like helped me validate this is Carvana's average gross profit's really high, and that's 100% DR. And they're going through a payment-based experience, well before they're in store every time. And I know there's some trickery with how they capture recon in that gross profit, right? So it's their recon is included, so it's a little bit sketchy, but it's still really high. It's like $4,400, right? And it's been pretty consistently high. And so I think that's proof positive that average gross profit is, for them, I mean, it's a massive scale of transactions, right? Tens of thousands.
Yeah.
They're publicly traded, so the numbers have to be vetted, and it's not like they're fake numbers that one dealer told another dealer, I averaged 10 grand gross last month. I mean, this is a publicly traded company. They have to produce financials. So when we saw the same thing, that was like, okay, well, why? And a lot of this is because of back-end gross profit, which if you've been in internet sales, that like if you've worked out the front side of the car deal and the customer's super happy and there's less kind of conflict there, when they're coming in and everything's ready, F&I is really much more effective. And you oftentimes do really, really well in F&I. And I think we've seen a lot of that with this, is that because most of the car deals sorted out, it's just much easier to add different products. And you're not kind of having to relitigate steps 1 through 5. You're focused on steps 6 through 10. When a customer's coming in and they're going into the business office, they're just sold on payment to begin with. And now fluctuating that payment just slightly for back-end profit is much easier. And so that's where the bias comes from. And again, the other thing as well, dealerships that do this have higher loyalty as well. So we look at loyalty as a percentage of transactions that month that came from their database. So in a month where, you're starting the month essentially with a significant tailwind, right? Every month you're going to have people that are from your database that buy a car from you, right? There's an inherent kind of rate of return. Well, if you're doing payments and ads, that is higher. And that's higher because your customers, if you're willing to give them an experience that they can't get somewhere else, they're going to stay with you. If you don't, they may leave you. And we're seeing massive defection since all this year, essentially. And it's been just getting worse and worse and worse as new cars aren't in stock, dealerships are doing different things, and customers are becoming used car shoppers. When people buy a used car, the loyalty is 5%. When they buy a new car, it's about 24% is what it was. It's about 12, 13% right now. So
Makes
when
sense.
everybody goes to used, again, loyalty gets really it's just kind of a problem. It's a math problem. But if you're using payments and advertising, that's one really effective way to fight back against it and consistent from store to store. So
Makes
this is kind of
sense.
the final math. When you think about this, this is our average kind of dealer profile across this study. We wanted to look at when I gave you that math of it's 1,000 more people. This is the math. 280 visitors in your dealership would normally see a payment. When you go up to the impression level where we're showing ads, these impressions were all impressions that had ads. This is whether it was Google or Facebook. So this is again 1,000 times more than what's average. And having it on your website is cool. Talking about payments and leads is cool, but 285,000 people, it's such a huge difference that I would love to hear the counter argument as to not do this.
I don't think there would be one.
So I was already convinced when Alex and I started talking 2 years ago, and everything I see about this just gets me so excited because the more this opens up, and I think next year we're going to start to see an arms race of this technology just becoming so important, as these manufacturers are so geared up for war. And when the new cars really hit supply, this is what customers already want. This is the expectation. And I think the progress that we've made on the tech side, we can now deliver in the customer experience, and just making this journey more effective from start to finish is just, I think it's a really exciting time. And next year we're going to be able to kind of like let all the toys loose. And I think it's kind of fun.
Yeah. One key thing that you brought up at the beginning, John, just want to echo that a little further, is this is new. It's, the industry hasn't had the tools at their disposal to show real payments to customers on a consistent basis and be able to deliver those payments in the store. So it'll expand from here for sure.
Yeah, and hopefully, I know many companies are working on this, and it's a huge challenge, and I think there's no one company can do this, but I think the lessons that we've learned on our scale is that it works and it's possible, and you have to manage the culture first. None of this stuff matters if the dealership doesn't believe in it and is going to be against the grain. And so if you meet the expectation there first, then the rest of this is possible. They'll just turn it off. I mean, that's what's going to happen. If you don't do this the right way and it causes heat, they're just going to say, stop doing this. But when they keep doing it, and that's because it's working and they like it and they want to continue to use it. So I would say, for anyone watching, look through the results, ask yourself, going into next year, how do you want to separate yourself from, dealerships in your market that would be asleep at the wheel. And there's often times when these innovations happen, a 1 to 2 year window where you can leapfrog a lot of competitors and embrace that kind of philosophy. And, they're going to catch up in years 3 to 5, but those 2 years, maybe, right, you can make a huge leap. And I think, again, your salespeople will thank you, because they're not going to be selling, Aveos with no AC and no manual crate windows, right? They don't want the ad kind of clown car stuff. They want to deal with real customers that are there in the car that are already kind of pre-sold in the payment. And that's like, if you can make things easier for salespeople, like, come on, man.
Yeah, get into the practice even before cars start showing up again. It's because they could, it's probably, I mean, we're probably not going to see anything in November, and more than likely December is going to be tough on the supply. But come into the beginning of next year, that could flip on a dime. So.
And the used stuff right now, I mean, the average dealer's used car inventory for us, maybe in March, was probably like 85, 90, and it's 135 right now. So the average dealership has added about 40, 50 used cars in stock. And, you know, there's hyper competition on used cars right now, massive competition. And I think of that, we were already seeing so much of that. And this again works better for pre-owned than it does for new because of the now relatively to no payments and ads for new. Again, we're talking about the baseline, but it works. The CTR is significantly higher, right? Just in used by default. And so this is just a one way to kind of cheat code, 1 to 2% CTR, like overnight. Like, what are you talking about? Like, what is there to even think about? Like, just do it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Well, Jon, we thank you very much for bringing these numbers to Dealer Refresh.
Absolutely, guys.
If someone wants to get a hold of you, has more questions, or maybe wants to check out Driven Data, how would they go about?
Yeah, just go to our website, driven-data.com. Or hit me up on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And I know you've got some more numbers y'all are working on for the future here. I was pretty impressed with something you shared with me not long ago about the average down payments and average equities and things of that. Yeah. So
we're in a position where we've started to build a bunch of tools to make this reporting easier for us to make. Used to take me and like a week. Now it's way easier, and there's a number of people involved now and on our team that are doing that. And so it's cool to be able to get that out faster and more accurately also. Like, not that, I can't do it, but not as consistent and not as the depth of it that we're kind of able to do now is pretty exciting. So, but yeah, we'll continue to, and we try every week to put out more new things like this and share those. And so on our LinkedIn, you'll see all that stuff, and we'll try to continue to push it out.
All right. Well, there's thankful Bill Playford there. So
yeah,
let's end on that note with a big thanks.
All right, guys.
Thank you, Jon.
All right.
All right, guys. Have a good weekend.